And we are live.
All right. That was enthusiastic. Thank you so much. And welcome to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. It is February 6th, and I believe, and we are here to learn about renewable energy Vermont and its work and follow up on all the topics that we've been talking about lately. So we'll introduce ourselves, including our committee assistant, and then we'll turn the table over. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Bennington 4.
Scott Campbell from St. John Gray, Calgary, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2.
Chris Morrow, Winchester, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Darren Torrey, Washington 2.
And Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Representative Sebelia is traveling.
Jack Locker, committee assistant.
All right, and
I'm sorry, John Brabant, Vermonters for Clean Environment, just listening in.
great. All right, for the record.
Peter Sterling, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Vermont. In a way, I'm a longtime listener, now a first-time caller.
Okay,
Nice, thank you for, in other words, thank you.
that was a good one. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so is my slideshow up? Or do we need to do that? Or you all have?
If you, I can put it up for the folks online to watch. Yeah.
Sure. All right, so about Renewable Energy Vermont, we're a nonprofit 501c6 trade association. We have 115 member businesses. We do advocacy and regulatory work around expanding Vermont's markets for renewable energy, regions markets for renewable energy of all kinds. One of the things many of you may have heard of, we've been hosting an annual renewable energy conference since 2001 up in Burlington. It's the largest of its kind in the region. So to jump right in, I'm on the third slide.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Peter, can we put your slides up on the,
I'm getting it.
oh, great. Let's wait.
Okay.
Okay, so we can follow along. And if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't.
Great. You know, you've been in here enough times to know that we're the question committee. So I want to make sure folks have something to see. Okay, you are synced up.
If you can go to the next slide, Jeff. There's where. All right. So this describes us, and this is just a sample of some of our member businesses who just do solar, not the folks who do all the other things around renewables, just some of the solar businesses around Vermont. And then, so I jump to the next slide to go into the kind of meat of what I hope I love to talk about is, to date, this committee has heard some very compelling testimony and accurate testimony on the cost of renewables and the renewable energy standard from the Department of Public Service. But costs are only one side. And here's my little bit of artwork. You see the my Shaw's bill from the other day, whereas, you know, if you look at one side, you just look at expenses, that paints one kind of part of the picture. But if you look at both sides of my Shaw's receipt, not only did I pay something, but I got things in return. And as you can see from this, my family eats a lot of cheese. Okay, so what do Vermonters get from investing in the renewable energy standard? So first of all, absent the requirement to retire renewable energy credits under the RES, almost 60% of Vermont's electricity would come from the dirtiest elements of Vermont's grid. So the Department of Public Service gave you this pie chart on the left. We would look, again, more like what's on the right, without having access to the RES. And what actually came out in the news yesterday.
Sure. Can you remind me what year the RES went into effect?
It was passed into law in 2015 and went into effect in 2017.
Thank you.
What came out yesterday in the news was that from January 20th through 24th, oil and gas were used in this New England system mix in the bucket. It wasn't just natural gas. Oil and gas were needed because of the cold weather to supplement the amount of natural gas we had in the region. That's a really good reason to invest in renewables, to make sure this region is still building using coal and oil. And when Sarah Adams was in here from ISO, she talked about this app she has, which actually is really cool. I only have like 5 apps on my phone, but this is one of them, and it does give you the up-to-date kind of understanding of what's in the ISO mix. So right now, at this very second, about 50% of that power is natural gas, 18% nuclear, then there's some hydro and renewables. So just lets you know in real time, like what that is, what our energy mix would look like if we did not have the renewable energy requirements from the rest.
Can you remind us, please, Peter, I just want to make sure that I'm trying to get a very concrete picture in my mind of our energy sources. So HQ system mix, that's Hydro-Quebec. Nuclear is Seabrook.
Yeah, and Millstone. I think Vermont utilities have some contract with Millstone in Connecticut.
Okay. New England system mix, remind me what that is.
That comes from the grid. That's on this just general stuff that's pumped into the grid to be used when we don't have enough power or something. I mean, so that's this mix from that I was just mentioning. It's made up of a bunch of different power sources.
Okay.
And that comes from all over New England.
Solar is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And then other hydro, I assume. Okay. So so without the res, we would be, in other words, without the requirements of the res, that's on the right. So we would be deriving our energy from nuclear, from large hydro, and then from that system mix, which is natural gas that could be supplemented by oil,
It's
coal, whatever.
hydro, wind, natural gas, coal, oil,
Whatever it
mix. But I just gave you a snapshot of today randomly and what came out for you as an example.
Okay, Rep. Howland, and then I think Rep. Campbell.
So the New England mix is all the energy that's coming into New England. That doesn't necessarily mean it was generated in New England. It still could be coming from external supplies. Generally, the electrons move west to east because the demand is north. New England's more of a user than they are a producer. So Hydro-Quebec and New York conductors flow electrons easterly.
Okay. I mean,
But you quoted that this is the New England system, and my point is that it's, when you said it was the New England system, I thought you were speaking of New England as being an island.
Oh, no, I'm talking about what legally Vermont can say, right? Because unless you're retiring a new renewable energy credit, which is what the res requires, legally, Vermont would have to say the chart on the right. Where the electrons come from is a completely different story, like you said. That's completely different. Yeah, I mean, okay, Hydro-Quebec's like 1,000 miles north of here, those dams. Like, less than this, the electrons in Vermont from there. Like, we don't know where that's
instantaneous.
So I'm just saying, you're right. The electrons can come from, north of New York and Canada and anywhere. It's legally what Vermont can say its energy source is, because that's the chart on the right, without the res requirements to retire regs. That's all I'm saying.
Rep. Campbell?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify also, especially people who are listening to this and say, well, we have contracts with Hydro-Quebec. And so our electrons are coming from Quebec, aren't they? And right, so this is the distinction I think a lot of people have a hard time of understanding. So I don't know if you can sort of say any more to explain to the uninitiated about sort of what this Rex means for what we can say.
I'll do the best I can.
Okay.
Less than 3 minutes.
Yes.
And I want to let you know, this took me forever to understand. Let's say St. Johnsbury American Legion is having a fundraiser, and up for raffle, silent auction is a $20 gift certificate to go to dinner. And you really want to do that. You want to go, but you can't go. So you call me up and you say, Pete, can you help me out? I can't make this. Can you go buy that certificate for me at the auction? At the auction. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So I go and I buy that. I meet you up the next day. I give you that $20. Think of me as like the solar producer and you're the utility. I've now given you this thing, right, which I no longer have access to. I cannot go to that restaurant and say, I actually bought this thing. Representative Kimball didn't do any of the work. Can I eat that? I can't say that because I don't own that certificate. When you pay a premium to buy that rec credit, you now, with that premium, the res premium, you are allowed to legally say, the only way you can legally say you use renewables if you own the credit from that power. Yeah, that certificate, that gift certificate you got, right? Does that make any sense? You have to pay a premium to say legally, this is not the law in Vermont, this is the law everywhere.
You might have gotten that $20 certificate for $5, or you might have gotten it for $40.
That's the, right,
It's
exactly.
a $20.
Yeah, that's right. And so the only way to legally say you use renewable energy is to retire the renewable energy credit from Hydro-Quebec or a NIPA dam in northern New York, where the electrons are flowing. Even like Belco, who kind of knows everything, to be honest, they're amazing. Even they can't tell you in real time.
Or from your own facility,
Sure,
right? Like you build a big solar farm and you're feeding clean electrons into your neighborhood. You can't claim it if you're also selling the RECs.
correct, right? I mean, the only way you can say you're using renewable power without the RECs, even that's pretty tricky. It's like if you have behind the meter generation,
Yeah.
you know, like I own solar on my home. I can't say that my house is powered by solar power because I don't own those RECs.
Right.
I know in my heart that when my kids leave the lights on downstairs and the solar panels are working, those solar panels are plugging in. If that stuff never even reaches the meter, I can't tell anyone that legally. But I know in my heart behind the meter generation it works. But yes, you're exactly right. Even if you have a solar array in your backyard, unless you own those RECs, you cannot legally tell them like a business. That's a big deal for a business. Why they purchase RECs. You want to tell their customers at all. Have I confused everyone more?
Well, I wanted to try out a way
Yeah.
that I
Okay.
have been thinking about it recently for a correction or shoot it down. So so I envision our grid as a physical, as the physical thing it is, which is connected to some various number of power sources, all generating electrons that are flowing into the grid. I just think of it as a very physical asset. And some of those power sources are dirty, some of those power sources are renewable. I think of the RECs as an accounting system layered on top of that shifts funding and resources and credits, in our case, to the cleaner sources, which boosts them up and encourages them and tries to shift their weight among that.
That's spot on. And the only sentence I would add is, and it allows the owner of that REC to legally say they use renewable energy.
Right.
It allows the owner to legally say they use renewables. Even if in your heart you know you're doing it, it does not matter unless you legally own a renewable energy credit for your energy use. So everything you said was spot on.
So it's physical grid versus the way we account for renewables in our system
That's exactly right.
and try to move toward them.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So again, to summarize.
So it wasn't too far off.
No, that was perfect. This slide again just shows you the benefit of investing in RES that
Peter's
allows,
analogy might be better.
it allows Vermont utilities to, account for how using renewable energy. The next slide, please. What do we get from investing in the RES? And again, the department showed you that slide on the bottom right there, which was the cost of the RES, right? That was the cost of retiring all those renewable energy credits. Again, completely accurate. But the benefit of retiring those RECs is the slide, if you look at the slide on the left, which comes from the Department of Public Services RES compliance model, Energy Action Network's information, we can say, as like I said, with retiring RECs, how low our emissions are from the electric sector. That's a benefit to Vermonters. And then you can see the chart on the right again from the Public Service Department's RES compliance model. This is, if we didn't have the RES, that's what our electricity emissions would look like, because we cannot legally say we're using renewables. So that's a benefit of the RES. Clear as mud?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. What's the impact on the future climate trends? What will that reduction in greenhouse gas produce? With the future climate trends happening, that's going to affect the greenhouse gas.
Right, it reduces our greenhouse gas emissions legally. So,
Even with climate trends changing?
oh, you mean like the world's climate trends?
Absolutely.
Oh, I don't know what it means compared to a global trend. I could find out. But I mean,
I think
just to be clear, like we're a city of 630,000 people. We're not a lot of people out here, but this is Vermont's way to do its part to reduce its emissions.
But we're trying to meet global standards.
Correct.
Paris Accord.
And that's what, so yeah, I mean, the legislate, the Paris Accord is a percentage. You're trying to meet a percentage of every entity is trying to meet a percentage reduction in emissions. I'm not an expert on the greenhouse gas emissions, and I mean, most folks on the energy part, but Paris Accords are a percentage. So every entity, country, state, city, is trying to reduce by a certain percentage their greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what this does. It helps us meet that percentage that we're trying to meet.
Rep. Plattner?
And I think the science behind the Paris Accord was to hold global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade. And so there's a certain amount of damage that will happen to the planet at 2 degrees as everything increases. I mean, there's no magic limit. Like every 1/10 of a degree that we keep it cooler is better. Every 1/10 of a degree that it goes up is worse in terms of storm damage, systems failing, and all that stuff. But I mean, I think there's some scientific consensus that the worst possible effects happen above 2 degrees. So that's why they said that. Then they figured out how much CO2 could be in the atmosphere to get that under deal with that.
In Sally, I heard this morning that January was the warmest on record, even though it was a La Nina year, and it was 1.75 degrees Celsius above baseline.
Yeah.
So, and we have a trailing of 12 months over 1.5, which was the target below the 2 degrees. So, got a lot of work to do. Anyway, I'm sorry, I diverted you.
Yeah.
Please.
No, you're answers I don't have.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rep. Howland.
So the chart on the left is telling you with the renewable energy credits, but over the last little bit with this real cold snap, I think new peaks may have been produced, may have been reached, and that the energy from your previous slide with the New England grid component with the dark circle, that electricity was still generated with non-renewable sources. The wind wasn't working, the solar panels were covered with snow, they weren't producing. So the fossil plants, the oil-based distillates, not the wood chips, were producing the electricity, but they're not included in your chart because they had a pile of your St. Johnsbury lunch credits to use. They cashed in their $20 chips. And so even though that fuel, that energy was produced with fossil plant, they aren't recorded because they traded in their renewable energy credits.
In a set, yeah.
But the energy was still produced by heating something to turn, using a fossil fuel to make heat to turn a generator.
And that's exactly right. And that's why people like me would say, the more renewables we bring online, the more battery storage we bring online, the more we encourage homeowners to conserve, the more we do flexible load management ways to maximize renewable energy, we push, and I have a slide later, we push those natural gas and those fossil plants off of line. We are not there yet on this grid. The marginal source of fuel in New England is basically natural gas. Occasionally, like you said, it's supplemented by oil or biomass or something, but it's really natural gas. When we bring more renewables online, we decrease our reliance on those natural gas grids. We are going to get to a point in the next 10 years or 15 years where we'll have very little natural gas. And the last thing I'll add is I don't have it on top of me, but I think if you look through the Velco, or excuse me, the ISO testimony, they showed you what was in the queue coming for new load. And they showed like 10 years ago, it was all it was like half natural gas and half other stuff. And that ISO slide showed you how it was all energy storage and new wind coming on. So we are moving in that direction away from those fossil plants, regardless of what happens with RECs.
Rep. Plattner?
And, I would just add, I agree that for people who aren't immersed in this, if you look at this and say, well, this is how our electricity is produced, and we just use whiteout to get rid of those bars here, right? Like RECs are kind of like whiteout. We can white out all those emissions. but the actual production was this, and it was producing these emissions, which is true, and the value of the RECs isn't primarily, in my view, it isn't primarily that it allows us to use whiteout and get rid of the emissions. It is primarily the fact that it makes producing electricity with solar a lot more profitable. So it encourages people to build more solar because every megawatt they produce, they get a REC, which they can then sell. So you're selling the electricity and the RECs. So it makes producing renewable much more economically viable, kind of regardless of what people claim and how the rest of it works. So there is an actual emissions reduction benefit. It's just on the front end and not on the back end.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So what did that cost Vermonters on the left side of this chart?
It's the transportation and thermal, or the res part?
Okay.
The res part or the thermal?
Well, the whole thing with the RECs and.
The recs are this chart from the department. So up till, well, my eyes are terrible. So up until 2023, he's saying $40 million over, I don't know.
I think it was 6% a year.
yeah.
So,
Second?
yes, but Director Poor said, when I asked him about this, that what it cost us was, I think he said it's about 3.5%. Our rates are about 3.5% higher than they would have been without the res. And that's in the context of still being usually the lowest in New England. And he also said, like, it's now 3.5%. When we get to 100%, it'll be more like 8% that it's adding to our Vermonters' electric bills. So I think that's
10 years out.
That's 10 years out, yeah. So that's what Director Poor estimated was the increase in cost to doing this.
But this is what I kind of want to get into a little bit in my testimony, and as we move down the slides. What you're seeing, and that's, it's a great question, what is the physical cost? What's the actual cost of the rent? Representative Clifton is exactly right, it's like 3.5%, and it'll go up to this number. But there's a lot of savings, there's a lot of income and other revenue sources from the res that are not accounted for in this one. This goes back to my Shaw's piece, my Shaw's receipt. This slide with in the bottom, that's just the cost side of the res. That's none of the savings or benefit side. So when you ask what the cost is of the res, there's a rate impact, but there's other savings as well that are not accounted for by the cost of the res. And that's what I'll get into in a minute. So I'll try to get there. So next slide, what do Vermonters get from investing in the res? And again, third cleanest grid in the country. Our calculations over at REV were that the greenhouse gas emissions were equivalent to taking 470,000 cars off the road between 2025 and 2035. So that's not nothing. That's real greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so here's where we get to the benefits, representatives. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is all from the Department of Public Services modeling that they did when they were producing their own res proposal. So these are not REV's numbers. These are Department of Public Services numbers. The column on the left was the number is the number that the department talked about with the cost of the RECs and the cost of the res. But what also the department modeled was all the benefits, and the greenhouse gas benefits, price suppression, meaning when you flood the market with cheap solar during the middle of the day, that brings down the price of everything else, which means everyone who's buying power pays less. Environmental and health benefits, and that was not insignificant, that was in the tens of millions of dollars. There's transmission benefits, meaning if you're building stuff in Vermont, you're not shipping it as far, which costs a lot less. Then there's all these benefits in this value stack, which, as you can see, and this again is the department's modeling, shows the benefit if you include, even if you don't include greenhouse gas benefits, which that's the kind of thing that kind of got us to the problem we have with climate change in the first place. But leave that aside. But even if you just look at the pure number ones, the benefits of the res do seem to outweigh the cost. And again, I would just point you to the footnote at the bottom. In the department's modeling, they use the social cost of carbon of only $128 a ton, which is far less than the number recommended by both the EPA and the Vermont Climate Council. So I think one can make the case that the department's modeling underestimated the price, the actual economic benefits to Vermonters from the res.
got questions.
Okay.
Webner, Campbell, James.
Okay,
I just want to provide two examples of benefits to Vermont. At Danforth, we were trying to get our small manufacturing facility to zero fossil fuel use. And one of the first things we did was contract with a solar developer to put in a small solar farm on an employee's land. And we and Gardner Supply got electricity at 5% below market. So small businesses had that benefit. And our employee on whose land it was got free electricity for the duration of the project. She was really happy about because she was using that field for nothing except paying taxes on, and all of a sudden it was providing her some benefit. So that project again would not have been built if we didn't have RECs that the developer could then sell. But there were developer assigned, the company and the two companies and the employee got economic benefits. And the other one is a 150 kilowatt solar farm that my brother and I recently had built on our family land in southern Vermont. And we get a couple $1,000s a year in lease payments for the land. But a bunch of low income families in West Wartburg, Vermont get meaningfully below market electricity from that project, which again wouldn't have worked if the developer wasn't getting RECs that they could sell in the market.
Thank you.
My next.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to, obviously there are benefits, financial sort of direct benefits to people who are able to take advantage of this. And I have panels on my roof, small panels on my roof on the north facing home and all that. I get something, I make a solar field as well. But I guess I'm also interested in exploring the bill implications for people who are not able to take advantage of it.
Sure.
So price suppression is that you have on this chart here is interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Does that reflect large utility-owned solar and wind?
it reflects the price of electricity that utilities need to purchase. So it essentially helps every ratepayer.
Right, but one of the issues that the department brings up all the time is that net metering is above wholesale price for utilities, so it's expensive power, right? So there's a price, whatever the other word for suppression is a price inflator or something, by having to buy net metered power. So where does the price suppression come from? Just what I want to.
The price, it mostly comes from larger arrays.
Larger arrays.
Mostly, it's not every time, but
Yeah.
mostly larger arrays.
Probably utility owned because they're not paying fee premium on.
Probably, but that's the thing is, utilities have to go to the Public Utility Commission to justify every rate increase. So they have a lot of incentive to keep their rates down.
Right.
Because they don't have unlimited capacity to raise their rates.
Right.
And so when they can invest in a project that helps keep the overall price of energy down, then it's a real benefit. This is, it's very real. In addition, to the one with, I'll also point to reduce losses like line losses. So when we ship power in, let's say, from New Hampshire or Hydro-Quebec, 6% just goes through heat, just gone. That means we are buying 6% from those big projects more than we need. That's kind of a lot. We do it every year, year and year. When you're building it closer to where you need it, you don't have that 6%. That's a real savings. And there's things like that help bring the cost of power down. I don't even know what the line loss is. Yeah, I don't know what this stuff is, but generally the utilities in the department use 6%.
Yeah.
So we are, really hacking away at that 6%, which is key, because the best thing we can do is not generate power in the first place. Right? That's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, Brett Schultz.
So you keep referring to savings on rates. There is no savings on rates, keep going up. We all see that. I don't see how you can quantify that we're saving on rates when all they do is keep going up.
If I said the word savings on rates, that may not be the best choice. Or what I think renewables does is I use like a word like price suppression, which is it kept rates from rising faster than they otherwise would have. Yes, rates keep going up because labor costs go up, taxes go up, these utilities pay taxes up. Also, if you ask any utility, they publish this information, especially ZEC, thinking about power, been quite outspoken. The recent wet, heavy snowstorms we've had the last 3 or 4 years is tens of millions of dollars in extra repairs for them that 5 years ago they never would have had. I think GMP said they've had the 3 most expensive storms in the last 2 years. It's many millions of dollars. So yes, rates are going up, and there's many, many factors. What I am trying to say, and what I have not seen the evidence of, this is what I'm trying, is I don't think Vermont's move to use more renewable energies is the main thing driving rates. I don't think that's the case at all.
I would tend to disagree.
Okay, Bailey, Helen, Buckner?
So in this cost, are all the subsidized dollars in here?
This is just the cost of buying RECs.
And we're trying to figure out what the overcharge that we're paying for solar, that's a benefit to the outfit that built your slaughter, right? Because he's getting a higher price.
Yeah, they can sell the RECs and they can sell the power.
But they were subsidized. Were they subsidized to build the farm in the first place? Was there?
No, they had to finance that commercially.
Okay.
But the numbers made sense to them because they'll sell as much.
But it wouldn't have made sense if they were buying at market for six cents a kilowatt.
I don't know.
And I think that would have to be a part of this cost in here, wouldn't you? I mean,
Well,
I don't.
Sure. Well, what this chart is intended to show just one thing, that the actual cost of the renewable energy standard that the Department of Public Service uses is the cost of purchasing RECs to comply. That's what this cost number is. The net metering, cost shift, like Representative Campbell was talking about, and you were just mentioning, that's kind of a different equation than what is in this cost column. This is the department's number of what Vermont ratepayers pay to comply with the renewable energy standard, which is different. Net metering is a procurement program. It's essentially a financing program. It's not a REC program. And so this chart is only intended to show the department's number for how much of complying with the renewable energy standard costs to retire the RECs to comply versus the benefits that they modeled to Vermonters. And that's all. If you want to, we can definitely talk about how net metering works, who's paying what, and how the subsidies work, and why it works and why it doesn't. And Jane, we can do all that, but that's not what this chart is intended to show at all. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have other hands? Yeah.
But after everyone else, since I've taken up more than my share of airtime here.
Rep Allen?
But
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you.
let me go
You're
after.
going
I will go
after,
after Rep
yeah.
Allen.
No, so you mentioned the 6% losses, which are the resistance of the wire and it's proportional to the square of the energy or the amperage. But those are going to occur for the short distance. The distributed generation is going to help keep that reduced when that distributed generation is producing. But when they have to depend on the Hydro-Quebec or other systems to support the voltage and the frequency, those items, and there's some voltage drop along the way too. Those are going to occur, and the system has to be stable enough to have reserves pending. So if the cloud comes over the generation in East Place, Vermont, the other systems have to back up to support the frequency and the voltage, and those are the things that why a utility separates from the New Hampshire supply if it goes way back to Indian Point or 63, but or thereafter. But these are the exposures that I was introduced to in my education of power supply.
That's exactly right.
So I think when Mr. Poor was in, they talked about the generator gets a capacity payment for being available when that cloud comes over or the wind doesn't blow, or we're talking renewables are what? Wind, solar, hydro, biomass. And so biomass, I don't think can come up in 15 minutes. They've got to boil water, and they're not. So those are still necessary components of the system, and I think we're overplaying the renewable energy sources in supporting what has to be there. You don't take the jack out of your car just because you haven't had a flat.
100% agree. Everything you said was spot on. The only thing I'm saying in this chart is this is the department's modeling for the benefits Vermonters get from the renewable energy standard. That's the only thing that this chart says.
Rep. Kleppner, and then I'm gonna say something, and then I'm gonna move us along so you can get through your slides.
And this will be the basic question of the day. Is there net metering for other renewables besides solar, or is solar is there net metering from wind or anything like that, or are they all grid other than solar?
I'd have to look at that. I'd have to look that up.
So, I think if I were a judge right now, I would ask our committee to stipulate that that there are costs to the renewable energy standard, and there are benefits to the renewable energy standard, and I think we have some philosophical differences on that. So let's not, what am I trying to say? Let's let Peter keep moving through his slides, and not to say that we can't ask many questions, but what I'm hearing here is, I think we can stipulate that a lot of our climate work here in Vermont, there is an upfront cost, and there's an upfront short-term cost in order to reap longer-term benefits. And I know we all have different feelings about that, but I think we can stipulate that things cost something and they reap savings. Rep. Southworth?
With all due respect, Madam Chair, we are here to represent the people that put us here. And I think that we should be able to ask the questions that we feel we need to ask.
I'm sorry, that was not at all what I was implying. I'm trying to just respect Peter's slides, that's all. And Rep. Southworth, I am not at all trying to cut off your ability to ask questions at all. I was just trying to acknowledge what I think is a deeper conversation playing out.
I have one thought that might help people sort of understand this. From my days running an energy efficiency program or weatherization program, there are two ways of looking at it. There's sort of program costs or program economics, and then there's customer economics. And we're talking in this chart here about program costs or program economics. It's also interesting to talk about, as I think Southwood is getting to, is the customer economics part of it. What does it mean to the customer and our voters? So we should. I know you're going to get into that. I just thought that distinction might help.
The next slide. We don't really have to spend a ton of time on this one. We want to keep moving. It's just another way to quantify the benefits of the renewable energy standards by looking at the social cost of carbon emission savings. And again, the little blue bar on the left that's the res cost from the department slide, how much it costs to retire RECs to meet the renewable energy standard. And on the right is the social cost, using the social cost of carbon. And in that pullout box, again, we found, the department's res modeling found $126 million of benefits to ratepayers, as I alluded to in that last slide.
Rep. Southwood?
So in the box on the right, you highlight benefits of Vermont ratepayers, $126 million for a 10-year period. says including reduced line losses and reduced transmissions costs. That doesn't benefit the ratepayers, that benefits the utility selling the power, correct? Because they're recouping that loss through the ratepayers. Correct.
I think it would be best to have someone from the utility come in to
It's
explain the
right
details.
there.
Right. So what that number, that to me, what that means to me is had we not done, this according to the department's modeling, had we not done the renewable energy standard, cost to ratepayers would have been $126 million more that the utilities would have had to ask the Public Utility Commission to recoup. Whether they recoup it all or they kept, I mean, in the case of a municipal utility or a co-op, they're all giving it back to the members. So that's really, to your point earlier, that's $126 million less than rates would have risen had there not been a res. So it's not money in someone's pocket. Rates would have gone up much more had it not been the benefits from reduced transmission and reduced line losses.
So you just said it's not money in somebody's pocket, but
Well,
we're
it's not like
talking about a
cash back.
social cost of carbon, and we put a dollar amount to that, correct? So I guess
No,
I'm
no,
failing to
well,
understand
yeah.
how you can
I think-
meet and put together a social cost of carbon for Vermont when the social cost of carbon is a global term, correct?
Sure. So first, I think my words may be getting twisted around somehow. That $126 million is money that Vermont ratepayers are saying. When I said it's not money in their pocket, it's not like they got a check. 630,000 Vermonters divided by 126 million.
I understand that.
Okay, I just want to be clear, like, it is money in their pocket in the sense that rates would have otherwise gone up, which Vermont ratepayers, businesses and homeowners would have had to pay, but for the investments made in the renewable energy
But
standard. That's what I'm saying.
my point being is the reduced line losses and transmission costs are already being absorbed and transferred over to the ratepayers. So I don't see where that
But without,
that savings is actually countable.
if we hadn't invested in renewables through the res, those savings would not have happened.
I still don't see the savings, they still fall through to the ratepayers.
Well, I'd be happy to maybe try to meet with you
That's where the
offline,
savings is.
talk more about
No, we
that.
still pay.
I mean, you'd rather get a $50 electric bill than a $75 electric bill. And it would have been 75 if we hadn't invested in the res, but now it's only 50, so you get to keep $25 and buy a six-pack.
You'd show me somebody whose rates have gone down to where they can.
Not gone down, but not gone up, right? They would have gone from 45 to 75, but instead it only went from 45 to 50. So you're laying out an extra 5 instead of an extra 30.
I don't see rates doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't.
Yeah, I
So,
Okay, the utilities put that in their filings to the PUC. They talk about that.
was gonna say, I bet we can find the.
No, we
data.
have
It's
that.
in the greenhouse.
They say it all, so
Yeah.
we can.
Are you
right,
saying avoided costs? Is that-
Yeah, that's another way to.
That's another way, yeah.
Avoided costs.
our next witness is here, so I don't want to cut you off. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So these are some of the savings to Vermonters from the investments in renewables and the rest that we've not seen quantified yet. It's just, no one's done the math, but we know it's out there. It's been talked about in filings for the PUC. So that way back when net metering started in like 2009, 2012, the peak of solar use, correct me if I'm wrong, it was right in the middle of the day, right? You had a lot of peaks, and you've seen
You're
more about
asking
it.
me.
You've seen a lot about this.
Christopher Howland, yes, the peak load for the utilities in my 30-something years history moved from an industrial load 10 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Think of an industrial plant with 2 shifts. And when solar came on, their peak production hours are, say, well, average 12 hours a day if you're middle. So anyway, they shifted the peak from the industrial base to 6 p.m. what I call the electric stove or electric dryer stage of when, so the home load or coming home from workload is the new peak. When I was last employed by a
Right, and that's
utility,
still the
which
case
was
now.
2017.
And so that savings of peak shaving, of utilities not having to buy all that power at that peak because solar's now cranking it out in the middle of the day, that was probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars by moving that peak away. That is, and that when, so when we talk about the benefits of net metering or other solar projects, that peak shaving was an enormous benefit to ratepayers because utilities no longer have to buy that peak power and then share the cost amongst ratepayers. That's just one example, one thing. Number two, grid improvements by net metering and other distributed generation projects. When I put solar panels on my roof, my little AW, I paid the person who put them in to connect that to the grid out of my pocket, right? When thousands and thousands of people do that, you're connecting what the department said, like 300 megawatts of net metering has been connected by consumers paying to connect that to the grid. Those are expenses that the utility otherwise would have had to pay to connect, to procure power. So that's a big thing. We've never seen the investments in grid improvements from net metering and other distributed generation projects. Lastly, just as an example of a savings that we've not ever found out is every time a municipality or a school accesses net metering, that reduces that municipality or that school district's taxes. It's generally a profit from that. And many schools and many municipalities have access to net metering. That's a number that is a savings or a benefit to not necessarily ratepayers, but to taxpayers. And so anyway, don't need to play that. I think I only have a couple slides left. The next slide, please. So we heard from the department accurately, I must add, that transmission costs are going to be increasing over time. That is a true statement. Vermonters are electrifying. We're asking them, we're incentivizing them to please plug in your car, please buy a heat pump. It would be natural that transmission costs and distribution costs would increase if we're asking them to use more electricity. I just want to refer you to, I started at REV in 2021. And in that time, I have not once found Velco or Green Mountain Power to be in error in their estimates or the information they produce. I think they are spot on. They do incredible analytical work. So I've come to rely on them for information. And both of them said in their recent reports that, the bottom line is, you can read these quotes for yourself, we have enough capacity to handle the amount of distributed generation and net metering and solar that we need. And that, Green Mountain Power said, we can do this renewable energy standard without needing more money for transmission and distribution costs. That's, very significant to me when you're concerned about what ratepayers are going to pay, what taxpayers are going to pay. The renewable energy standard bill that this legislature passed last year, at least according to the in-state requirements for Green Mountain Power, our largest utility, is not going to add any costs. Velco, our state transmission and planner, is saying that we have enough room on our grid today to do 1,057 megawatts of solar. And we're nowhere near that. We probably won't hit 1,057 megawatts of distributed generation until maybe 2030. By that time, Velco will have already made, as they said in the report, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional investments in the grid because Vermonters are electrifying. So I'm just trying to get across this slide, at least with my read of what Velco and Green Mountain Power are putting out is the renewable energy standard is not really driving transmission costs. That's what I would say. Okay, last or second to last slide. On the left, and both of these charts, both of these figures you see come from the Department of Public Services public engagement process that TJ referenced. This slide on the left is what you saw, which talks about how Vermonters prioritize affordability. I just really want to say, affordability was never defined in that poll or in the focus groups. And so every Vermonter who answered this question was never asked, what's affordable? I want energy to be affordable. Otherwise, no one's going to electrify, and then we've got problems, right? So affordability is a very subjective term in this poll, but when the department did ask Vermonters a specific question, how much would you be willing to pay a month for 100% renewables or low carbon energy? That was the only specific question they asked them. What are you willing to pay as a Vermonter? Again, and that pie chart on the right is the exact same people who got asked the question on the left. Only, well, you can see it for yourself. 17% said, I don't know. 31%, I don't want to pay any more, and everyone else said, I'm willing to pay between $1 and $50 more a month. So I just think that this pie chart on the right from the department's poll gives a little context to the chart you were presented that talks about affordability being this big concern. And then the last slide, and again, this, at least for me, is super, super important. On the right there is a base load 360 megawatt, 60 acre natural gas facility in Dayville, Connecticut. There are 64 of these scattered around New England, none are in Vermont. And I just want to give you the context of what a 60 acre plant looks like. We are in the State House. If we go from the State House up to National Life on the Hill, down to the Shaws down there, you know Montpelier, back over to the library, and back to this building, that is 60 acres. That's how big this plant is. So when we need renewable energy, when we don't have enough energy, we rely on baseload natural gas plants. Like I said, it's a marginal source of energy. And we also cover oil and gas. But again, none of those are in Vermont. So we rely on these plants in other states to give us the energy we need. And one of the real reasons to do the res is to stop that reliance. It isn't really just or fair that millions of people live next to these plants while we, refuse to build one here. And, then maybe talk about why we shouldn't put up more of our own power. And that one is, that moral one is a real important one to me.
Representative Howard?
Well, I think that what you outlined was a lot more than 60 acres.
Definitely. Can I tell you, my wife's a professional mapper,
Well,
and she did this, and there's no way it's wrong.
right, but the gas baseload, the gas plant for the scattered around the rest of New England, what did you say the capacity was? They're 50 megawatts each, and they talked.
No, I didn't say that. I said they're over 50 megawatts.
Over 50 megawatts. So they talked about the Burlington Electric, I'm gonna call it oil generation, and the one in Green Mountain Power Territory up here in Montpelier, that they were just greater than 25 megawatts, and they're there for that fluctuation in load in the neighborhood when essentially the distributed generation of the time when they were building this. But I think there's a lot of questions that are raised between the renewable energy people and the testimony that we're going to get tomorrow when net metering and the standard offer comes in. And I think when we're taking these one at a time, we don't have the advantage of cross witnesses.
Just to be clear with this slide, what I'm saying in this slide, just to be super clear, Vermont does not have a baseload natural gas plant or any baseload fossil plant. We have some peaker plants.
And these are baseload plants, you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. We do not have a baseload power fossil plant in Vermont. We rely on every other state.
But are these peak load? I guess when I was in the generation business, they called it economic dispatch, so that they would dispatch the plants when they were the best economic value for total cost of production. And in that is without respect to the type of fuel that they were burning.
That's not what these are. These are the baseload ones. Those are different plants that operate in different schedules that ISO coordinates.
So we do have our national speaker. Pardon?
Yeah. Well, they're also, these types of a plant is variable speed. So they may be on when there's some need for energy, but they're not on full capacity all the time. And so think of it as your car is started, you're running down the road at some speed, and you either desire or have to go faster. You step on the accelerator and you get a near instantaneous acceleration or increase in speed. And so I think that these are necessary to provide support for the times when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, and the fossil fuel plants have an ability, the oil-fired plants have an ability to react to the need and time that you don't have if you have to load wood in a boiler or coal in a boiler.
Right, and I'll just end with what I said earlier, which is every time Vermont puts up a renewable energy resource, it's more hydropower, more wind, more solar, we lessen our reliance, all of New England's reliance on these grants. That's my only point I'm making. I'm not saying they shouldn't exist or they can't exist. I'm just saying when we do something to bring on new renewables like we did with the renewable energy standard, the millions of people living near these have, like you said, we take our foot off that accelerator a little bit and it pollutes a little bit less. That's all I'm saying in this slide.
But the exhaust is also treated and cleaned to the extent that it can be. No longer, there are mechanisms in place that have removed some of the particulates that go up the old chimney.
Okay, we do have our next witness here, so I don't think we have time to take a break.
I'm sorry about that.
No, we always have a lot of questions. We should have allowed more time for you, so.
Thank you so much for this time, and I do appreciate all the questions. Jack has my email. If anyone wants to do any follow-up, I'm always happy to try to get more specific answers, so thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
And Peter.
We're better, Peter, trust me.
Yeah, all right. Sorry that we're running a little bit behind. So we have floor at 3, and we need to be out of this room 5 minutes before floor, and everybody's probably going to need a break. So why don't we wrap by 2:45?
Great.
Okay.
For the record, Peter Walk, Managing Director of Efficiency Vermont. I'm joined today by 2 of my colleagues, Kelly Lucci and Dave Westman. They are part of the Efficiency Vermont leadership team, collectively run strategy and partnerships and our state agency and regulatory affairs side of the house. So I've asked them both to be here with us. Kelly's going to join me in doing some of the presentation. And then Dave is here as a resource, as the sort of the best resource in the state for knowledge about some of your questions about what strings are attached to various pots of money. And so with that, Kelly, would you mind sharing your screen with the slides and we'll get started?
Absolutely. Just give me 1 second here. Are folks seeing that?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Peter, do you want to kick the presentation off and just tell me when you let me take over?
Exactly. Let's do that. Thank you. You want to go to the next slide?
Yep. Hang on. There we go.
All right, perfect. We did our one-on-one with you for a couple hours last week, the week before, I can't remember, but so you know who we are. We are again here, and we're going to talk specifically about the energy burden report, which is a periodic effort we do to look at the impact on the cost of energy on Vermonters and how it differs in different parts of the state, and how we work through some of that data. So we'll go into that in a moment. But just a reminder of who we are. Efficiency Vermont is the statewide energy efficiency utility. We work in conjunction with our partners, the other energy efficiency utilities, Burlington Electric and Vermont Gas, as well as with the distribution utilities and other partners throughout the state. You want to go to the next slide, Kelly? I thought this would be useful because I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I'm sorry that Representative Sibilia isn't here because it's one of the questions that she had around how do we make sure that we are assuring, serving all parts of the state. I want to start on the left side first. Just to give you a sense of Efficiency Vermont is the brand of Efficiency Vermont is actually owned by the state of Vermont. VIC, our parent company, operates that under a performance contract, essentially for the state. We follow certain measures as to how our performance is defined. You'll see those on the left. They're a little bit hard to read. You have the slides for future reference, but the vast majority of those are related to electric system benefits and ratepayer benefits overall. Greenhouse gases, as we discussed a little bit last time, are 5% of our overall performance at present, along with some making sure that we are being as efficient administratively as possible, so that we're delivering strong returns for the ratepayers. On the right-hand side, we are obligated to provide minimum benefits across the state, including a return of at least what every county put in terms of the electric efficiency charge. So we're returning value everywhere. So while you'll see some challenges in terms of the distributions of benefits, we are regulated to the point where our performance is based on our ability to meet that basic minimum. We try to exceed that as we return value across the board. I also want to mention that part of that is structural in nature. You have asked us to go out and get the most cost-effective energy efficiency possible. That is an important part of what we do. It is harder and more expensive to work in communities where additional work on a home might be needed, additional support might be needed, language services might be needed. We're willing to make those investments, but they do cost more. We do have to balance that with other less expensive energy efficiency. So just wanted to name that's part of the system that we've collectively, that you started with the initial policy framework and statute, the PUC implements, and then we go out and implement on the ground. So as we go through this, I would ask you to bear some of that in mind as some of the details come through. You want to go to the next slide, Kelly? So before I hand it off to Kelly, I just want to talk a little bit about what the purpose of this report was, to really understand how Vermonters pay for their fuels, what it looks like in terms of percentage of their income, where the folks are most challenged. We'll get into detail into how we do that and some of the determinations that we can make and some of the advancements over the course of time that as we've done this report on multiple occasions now, can really understand some of the more localized challenges, as well as how this relates to some of the distribution of benefits in different programs. Kelly, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Perfect. So as Peter said, this is a report that we've put forward now 3 times, looking at trends, trying to understand impacts of programs, how we can do our work better within all of the bounds of the performance requirements that are in place for us. But before I jump into what we learned from the report, it'd probably be good to explain what energy burden is. So energy burden, very simply, is a measure of energy spending at the household level as compared to household income. So you can do this at the individual level if you have that information. When we're looking statewide, what we tend to do is break that down into sort of smaller geographic units. So we might look at a town level. What is the average spending happening in terms of energy, and how does that compare with the median household income for that community? So that's the framework that we're using as we walk through this report. And the report that I'm walking you through today, as I said, it's a 3rd iteration. First one was in 2016, second was in 2019. This one was from 2023. And it was based on data that was largely from 2017 through 2021, because at the time we were putting it together, that was the most recent that was available. We will probably be due for an update at some point in the next couple of years, probably 2026 at this point.
Kelly, before you go further, I will say there is data in here that raises immediate questions. We'd rather address them immediately, Madam Chair, if that's appropriate.
Yep.
Because there are clarifications that we don't want people to leave confused about the data.
Sounds good.
Exactly. Okay. So this shows our general assessment of sort of the makeup of energy burden in Vermont. And the pie chart gives you a sense of some of the components related to end uses. So the orange slice is thermal spending, the green slice is electric spending, and the blue slice is transportation spending. So when we look at energy burden, we want to understand, what are the drivers of spend at the household level, which is why we break it up into these three categories. We typically um, I often get the question, how does this compare? How does Vermont compare to other states or other areas where energy burden is explored? And so one thing I want to be clear about is Vermont is a little different in including transportation energy costs. Other states don't typically include that when they're looking at energy burden. We felt like that was really important. We've included that in our report since its inception because we recognize as a rural state, transportation is a significant cost, a significant component of energy costs when you're talking about needing to purchase fuel to get from one place to another. So that is one place where we differ a little bit. For those who are interested to understand kind of apples to apples, how does Vermont compare to other states? Typically, you would consider energy burden high if you had combined thermal and electric over 6% of a household income. And when we remove the transportation component from our assessment of Vermont's energy burden, we end up at about 5%. So higher end, not quite, over that sort of generally accepted threshold nationally, but definitely higher end. The other thing I want to name on this slide is there's a lot of information and data in this report. I'm only going to touch on some of the high level takeaways today and certainly happy to dig in deeper in discussion, but you can also explore this data directly yourself by going to efficiencyvermont.com/energy burden. We actually have interactive maps that break this down geographically at the town level and at the census block level. I'm going to share some more of that data going forward, but just want to point folks to that resource if this is something they're interested in digging into further after we talk today.
We have a question.
Yeah, so that's just clarification about that. So this is statewide average, right?
Yes.
Correct, yes.
And do you have this level or this breakdown in finer census blocks or towns or whatever? Is that? But I didn't see this chart, this particular chart on other, for other districts or.
Yes, you can dive in and look at the components of energy burden at various geographical levels if you go to that website that I just pointed to.
Great.
Yep, census block level, town level, all of those things.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one thing I just always think is important to name, if you go back to that energy burden calculation I showed earlier, components of it are both spending and income. When we put this report together, we always try to keep an eye on sort of what's happening with that denominator, what's happening related to income. So some of the changes that we observed from our 2019 report to our 2023 report in terms of income are captured here. There were, keep in mind the time frame we were looking at did include the global pandemic, which definitely upended a lot of trends that we might otherwise have seen. So, we'll see what holds when we look at our next report. But if you're curious to kind of understand that underlying change and how it played out at a town level, this chart sums it up effectively. It's safe to assume that in most cases where you're seeing a significant decrease in median income, you're also going to observe a corresponding increase in energy burden. So that's just the kind of relationship it's important to keep in mind. Okay. So with that, I'm going to talk about town level data for total energy burden and then across each of the end use categories that I shared earlier. Again, census block level data, which is more granular, is available on our website. So this is these two maps show on the left side total energy burden across the state at the town level and annual amount spent on energy across the state at the town level is on the right side. So a couple things to observe here. If you're talking about the annual amount spent, it is worth noting that sort of the degree of variation that we see tends to be driven primarily by thermal and transportation spending. We see less variation in terms of spending on electricity across the state than we do the other two energy categories. And if you're thinking about annual amount spent and sort of what that means as you look across various communities, some of the lower spending communities, some of the lowest spending communities were around $4,000 a year when we modeled it out, and higher spending was up around 8,000 and slightly above. So that's a pretty strong variation when you're looking at total costs across all those categories, as we model that across the state. When you look at energy burden and how that spending manifests in relation to median income in these various communities, you see, somewhat of a strong pattern represented in the left-hand map. We can see that the northwestern part of the state has lower energy burdens at a town level than other regions of the state, particularly the Northeast Kingdom, where we see some of our most highly burdened communities on the basis of total energy. And on my next slide, I'm going to dive into that a little bit more deeply. Okay, so this is a list of the towns across the state where we identified a total energy burden of higher than 15%. As you can see, all but two are located in the Northeast Kingdom. One thing that's worth noting is that for a lot of these communities, you can identify, and I'll dig into this on some of the individual spending categories. What is a driver of the energy burden is not necessarily higher than average usage of energy. A lot of these communities are coming in, relatively close to average usage across the state. But what becomes a driver of a higher energy burden is the underlying median income in those communities. And you can see the bottom line on this table just gives you the statewide averages, so you have a basis for comparison. Okay. And just one more note, again, that we can get more granular for larger population communities if you go to that website. And this visual just really shows why it's important to leverage smaller geographic units for larger for communities with a larger population. Because really, when you take a community like Burlington or Barrie, where there are more folks living there, more households, it is very hard to do it as an apples to apples comparison with, say, a much smaller community I live in, only 1,200 people. You're going to obscure significant variations when you kind of take an average over that many more households, and then you try to kind of make an apples to apples comparison against a smaller community. So the census block variation you can see in Barrie is pretty significantly different when you're able to dive in with a deeper level of granularity. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn to each of the end use categories: electricity, thermal, and transportation, and just give you a quick overview of what we observed when we look at energy burden at a town level for each of those categories. So the first one here is electricity. Again, I have total electricity burden on the left side. I have annual amount spent on the right. You can see, as I noted before, there's not as much of a variation in terms of electricity costs across the state on average at a household level. This is residential, keep in mind. You will see higher variation among the other categories. When you look at the pattern of burden on the left side of the map, again, that northwestern part of the state is where we see relatively lower electricity burdens when we look at this on a town level. We tend to see, areas in the Northeast Kingdom and across the southern part of the state that electricity burden being higher. One thing I often get asked about in terms of the right-hand map, the spending map, is what are the drivers of some of those pockets of higher spending, where the map shows up red. It's a little bit tricky to assess that, but fairly consistently we've seen that sort of western region of southern Chittenden County through Addison County be higher in terms of residential electricity spending. Some of that we think is driven by the fact that farmers can actually choose to work off of a residential rate from their electric company. So there may be some kind of much larger users that are skewing the data a little bit, particularly for small communities, where you might have, the appearance of much higher average residential electric usage.
Yeah, Rep. Kleppner.
Question?
Yes, sorry. Might it not also be true that that western part of the state is more affluent, so people use more electricity because they have bigger houses, and probably electric car penetration's higher in the Champlain Valley than elsewhere? I'm just guessing.
That's true. Generally there's a pattern. This is unique to Vermont, but typically folks of higher incomes use more energy. So that certainly can be that could be a driver as well. As you'll see later on, I do actually share a map, not of electric vehicle penetration, but of cold climate heat pump adoption. And those tend to be some of the higher areas of the state where that has been adopted as well.
Thank you.
So good flag. Thank you for naming that. Okay. Moving on to thermal. So again, burden is on the left, annual amount spent is on the right. And you could see similarly, we have, pockets of higher spending actually in the Upper Valley area, but that doesn't always translate on the left map into higher burden, and that's due largely to some variations in income that are present in those areas. When we look, just on the burden side, we see, a version of that broader pattern that I've shared a couple times already, where we see the northwestern area of the state generally coming in lower in terms of burden when you look at it at a town level, and higher in the Northeast Kingdom and outlying areas when you look at how energy burden manifests. I think I see a hand raised.
Yeah.
Would part of it in the Northeast Kingdom maybe bear on more wood burners, more people with wood stoves, more wood furnaces?
Absolutely. Yes, I was going to note that. So on the thermal side, one reason that we see, less thermal burden is likely the fact that there is the VGS pipeline in that area. Natural gas is a relatively cheaper fuel. And similarly in the Northeast Kingdom, where you don't see the spending quite as high, that there's definitely a higher prevalence of wood heating, which is also a cheaper fuel. In this category, it's more pronounced than in others. You're not seeing higher usage in areas where there is higher burden. You're actually seeing, for example, in the Northeast Kingdom, average or slightly below average usage typically.
Yeah.
Is there any consideration given to the age of the housing units? I see in particular in my area, Proctor is a little above and Rutland City. So where there's older housing units and Rutland Town, the sprawling of the post, say late 60s and on housing.
That absolutely is a factor. This analysis looks at not the assets of a home, but what is the spending likely to be. We use several data sets, but it does give us an indication of overall usage, and absolutely when a home is old, when it's not weatherized, the usage and fuel usage is going to tend to be higher. So that can absolutely manifest in this output.
In the rural towns.
Yep. I think that's all the questions. Should I move on to the next slide? All right, so closing out those end use categories with transportation, again, burden on the left and annual spending on the right. This is an interesting one. This is, I think, where that pattern with the Northeast Kingdom having higher burden is more pronounced even than some of the other categories. And a major driver of this is a big input to our analysis is vehicle miles traveled at a local level. So we use U.S. Census data to look at that at a community level, and certainly where you're seeing much higher vehicle miles traveled on average in a community, that is going to drive up usage, and it's going to drive up the burden as well. And correspondingly, you look at the northwestern part of the state, people who live in that area tend to have more options available to them in order to reduce their transportation costs, even in addition to having smaller commute and travel times. Okay. So with that, I'm going to move on to just cover some of the high-level strategies for alleviating energy burden, some of how that manifests in programs. And Peter, I'm going to walk through these slides, but I'm going to invite you to jump in if you want to add anything in the room as I'm walking through this information, okay? All right. So this is included, this information, in the full report. We actually have an appendix that has a whole list of different measures and projects that people can take in their homes, and what, assuming average usage, average, Vermont home, how that is going to impact the burden for that customer. And I just pulled the top 4 that were listed in that appendix for sharing here, but I'd invite you, if you want to dig in further, to take a look at the full report. One key theme you're going to note if you look at each of these steps is they all are projects that would have a pretty high upfront cost. So it is, it is important to note that the steps that a customer can often take to reduce their energy burden typically require more support, more financial incentives, more engagement to enable them to actually take those steps and reduce their energy burden. And that's something we take really seriously as we're thinking about program designs. I also want to provide a little bit more context on electrification. It is it's a very important step. It can be very helpful in many cases, but it is not fair to say that for every customer that electrification is always going to save them money. It can be tricky to make broad statements like that, and so we are always careful to recommend that customers reach out to us as they're contemplating projects. We can actually help them model and understand the likely impact on their costs, so they're really making an informed decision. Certainly there are many great reasons to install a heat pump, but if you have access to cheaper fuel than electricity, you want to be aware of that. There may be other reasons you want to do it. Certainly if you're installing it as an air conditioner, that's going to drive up your electricity costs, but you may have very good reasons for wanting to take that step. So just want to provide that little caveat. The other thing around electrification. Yep.
We just can't see what that column says. Can you just read
that?
that?
Says change in annual residential electric usage, 2019 to 2021.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Oh.
No, I'm in the middle.
You're
There
gonna
we
get a
go.
headache.
All right.
I don't even know what high-tech magic's happening in there, but I'll take it that you guys can see what you need.
Bringing down the average age was able to move something around.
So this table actually just shares a trend that I thought was interesting. Again, this is the 3rd iteration of this report. And from our first one in 2016 to our second one in 2019, we actually had a table like this and showed, that on average, residential electric usage went down for almost every county in the state between those 2 years. But now from our second iteration of this report to our third, we observed an increase on average at the county level for residential usage just across the state. So striking, I often get asked, right, is this an indication that, electrification is really taking off and it's starting to show in terms of usage? I think, one data point doesn't a trend line make, but I'm not going to be surprised at all if we see that that continue when we do our next look at this data.
And the power, the usage went down because of like conversion to LEDs and things like that, or was
Because of Efficiency Vermont and our partners getting out there and helping folks save electricity.
well said, well said, okay. Moving right along.
All right. So the other question, we often get asked is like, how does this map up? How does energy burden map to participation in programs? How are those connected or not? And so one of the things we did with this iteration of the report is we took a look at uptake of certain programs and looked at it in relation to aspects of energy burden that it could help ameliorate. So this is an example of total thermal energy burden on the left. So you've already seen that map here. But what we also did was took the statewide data that we have access to because we operate a statewide point of sale program for cold climate heat pumps alongside Vermont's electric utilities. And we just looked at per capita participation in that program. So you could get a sense of, how that compares. And in this case, it's worth pointing out that, that is a point of sale program, which means that the discount gets taken out at point of purchase when somebody has, made a decision to move forward with a heat pump, obtain the resources to do that. So it's a relatively passive program. It certainly helps us to ensure that the cold climate heat pumps getting installed are the most efficient they possibly can be, and that distributors, retailers are stocking models that will work in Vermont's climate. But we would obviously like to see a little bit more overlap, right, of communities that are high energy burden with those that are where we're seeing folks being able to install technologies like this.
And that goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning about the structure that's already in place, the systemic approach to efficiency that we've used. In seeking cost-effective energy efficiency, you have to ask questions about whether or not that's the only goal or whether there are benefits, additional benefits we want to achieve, as in helping, such as helping those who can least afford it make the transition sooner than some of the folks who already can. And so your indication, when we have passive programs like the point of sale program that Kelly's describing on the right, that doesn't take that into account. So we need to think about the transition that we're asking folks to make. How do we help them along, and how do we design programs that do that?
Right. It certainly helped to drive the broader market for heat pumps, and made Vermont a leader in that respect. But there is an important opportunity to figure out what that means in terms of accessibility.
Is there another explanation or a explanation about why this is so skewed? Was there more outreach in this area, or it seems so heavily skewed to that
We
one?
do statewide marketing campaigns. It's available to everybody in each form. We intentionally work with all the utilities to make sure that the return for each service territory is precisely the same in terms of the incentive. It's an indication of both demand and a capacity to take on projects.
Oh, so there might be more installers in this area in the red than the
Exactly. Yep. And I think it's worth too noting that these things can be there's a momentum that comes in certain areas of the state where more people do something. There's more installers available. Oh, my neighbor did this. It can really work. Like, I can talk to them. I can understand. This is a big transition for people to consider installing a new heating system in their home. These technologies are relatively nascent for some folks. They might not have experience with them, and that word of mouth, that validation from talking to folks who've had that experience matters. There's also variations in electric rates across the state, which may make the installation of a heat pump much more cost effective for folks, and that can certainly play into people's decisions too. As I referenced earlier, I'm not comfortable with a blanket statement that says electrification is going to save money in all cases. In very many cases it can, but it is really important for customers to have the opportunity to get general advice and help them really dig into implications for them based on their usage and what they need coming out of their home. Okay. So just another kind of way to slice that and understand that question of accessibility, took a look at the communities in the state where there's greater than 5% energy burden. And I, in this table, have kind of mapped that against the estimated per capita rate of cold climate heat pump adoption and weatherization in those communities. And you can see the statewide average is represented in the lowest row. But one thing that is striking coming out of this is in only one case, and that would be in the case of Brattleboro with weatherization, is any community sort of overperforming the state average in terms of uptake of projects that could address thermal energy burden. And on the next slide, did something similar on the transportation space. So where thermal burden is greater than 7%, looked at the estimated rate of adoption of electric vehicles. And in all cases, these communities are far below the statewide per capita average of adoption. Again, these are all high cost measures. It's really important to note.
And it's important to note the impact of charging networks and other things on adoption of EVs, especially in the
That's right.
where publicly available chargers are not as, so there's a number of factors that play into this, right? But it's
right. And where vehicle miles traveled are higher. People need, that reliability. Mm-hmm.
My favorite saying when I worked for state government and would meet with other states is that Vermont has 14,000 miles of roads and only 6,000 of them are paved. I look at you like you're crazy. And, it really tells the tale of what our state is like and the challenges that we face and the programs we need to design to be able to help people to overcome barriers to adoption and to work on solutions that meet people where they're
at. Okay. So just have just two more slides here, because I thought one thing that's important as we're talking about energy burden is to recognize that is one lens, that is one way that we can look at, the needs of the customers we're serving and how that overlays with the programs we're putting into place. But there are other ways to think about accessibility as well. And so I just wanted to give a quick example of some lessons that we have learned as we have continued at Efficiency Vermont over the last 5 years or so to invest in doing more direct community engagement. And when we do community engagement, it's not just about showing up, at a community and standing behind a table, although there is a fair amount of that too. But it also means that we're really digging in to build relationships with partners, with folks on the ground, and to hear feedback from customers that we can then bring back to integrate into our program design more effectively. So these are a couple examples where we've learned some lessons as we've been out in the field serving Vermonters, and we have brought those back into our programs. So the first one, really over the last few years, we've had a really concerted effort that we've made to focus on providing more service to renters. As you can imagine, it is singularly challenging for someone who is a renter to reduce their energy costs when they don't control the building or that they live in. Their control is limited, perhaps. So we have had for a long time an appliance voucher program where a customer who qualifies is effectively given a voucher that they can bring to an appliance retailer, and they can get a free energy efficient appliance to install in their home. As we've been circulating, trying to improve services to renters, we really realized, a couple things that could be improved about this program. For one, there used to be a more cumbersome process, where you as a renter needed to get permission from the property owner to participate. There were assumptions that we made about, how much a renter would even want to participate in a program like this because they probably don't own their appliances, right? As we have engaged directly with customers and learned more about what they've needed, we've made some changes, recognizing the fact that there are renters who control more appliances than you would think, and there are appliances that we maybe hadn't included before. Things like window air conditioners, dehumidifiers, things that renters are much more likely to own themselves. So we've now integrated those into the program. They are eligible. And this is a case where energy burden is an important lens, but certainly not the only one. In the case of this program, we used to qualify people based on their electric burden. So we'd say, okay, what is your annual income? Look up your usage. And, if you met a certain electricity burden threshold, you would qualify for the program. But what we learned is that, a lot of renters have much lower usage of electricity in some cases. And certainly folks who are very low income tend to have lower electric usage. So we've actually really moved to just a straight up income qualification metric for this program, and seen, a corresponding increase in accessibility, more folks being able to participate. So that's been an important improvement. And again, the type of lesson that you really learn when you go out and you seek that candid feedback from people about your programs. And then the last example I want to share actually relates to a local Montpelier restaurant that we served as part of our broader efforts to support flood recovery. In this case, a whole other aspect of program access, very different from energy burden, but really important. In the course of working with this customer, we realized that our translation services were not up to snuff. We had to go back twice to translate the forms that we use for participating in programs, and our staff out in the field who actually do walkthroughs and provide direct support to businesses, they didn't have great access to an interpretation service. So, upon having this experience, we've actually invested in a much more robust language translation service that provides in-field video calls, interpretation versus translation, which there's a big difference from just using like a service that one for one translates a word to using somebody who actually speaks a language and understands cultural context and can actually convey meaning more effectively. And so we've been really pleased to be able to bring some improvements to customer access in this respect, again, totally outside of how you might think about energy burden. So those are all the slides that I have today. I'm happy to leave them up for a minute if there are other questions, or I'll just take them down, Peter, because I think there were other topics you wanted to cover with the committee.
There are. We do have a question from Representative Bailey.
Yeah, could you back up 2 slides from the end, the appliance ones are right there. Mm-hmm. So you said you're giving them a free voucher for a free appliance. What type of appliances are they buying, and does that stay with the unit when they leave?
So yep, it's a great question. So this is only for appliances that the renter owns or has control over, and there's a wider range than you might expect. We've definitely, the customer who actually was most instrumental in the feedback we used to change this program. She actually had a chest freezer. Or an extra freezer that she was using, and that failed, and that was hers. She owned it. So we have added a number of appliances to the list of qualifying appliances, things like window air conditioners, dehumidifiers. I'm more than happy to get you the full list of appliances that can qualify. But if you are a renter, the important thing is, we're not encouraging you to change something out that actually belongs to your property owner. It's just recognizing that there are renters who own more appliances than you would think, and in those cases, we want to make sure they're able to make that changeover.
You bet.
All right, so thank you, Kelly. Kelly is one of the 2 authors of that report, and so she is a wealth of knowledge. So if there are follow-up questions, we're happy to answer them as much as possible. And we look forward to the next round of the data as more becomes available. What we saw from 2017 to 2021, we anticipate will continue to change and evolve as circumstances on the ground have changed, and every time we update it, we learn a little bit of something new, and we see the progress the state is making, or where there are opportunities to continue to make progress. The chair asked me to speak a little bit to how, we were talking a little bit last time I was here about the ways in which Efficiency Vermont, the requirements on the way we spend money, and how that works. It is a complex web of both statutory and regulatory direction. That's why Dave Westman is here, because he is the expert in that piece. But I do want to provide some initial thoughts as we go forward. For those who aren't aware, the sort of primary statute for the work that of the energy efficiency utilities is in 30 VSA 209. That is a great place for you to start in terms of understanding what it is you're asking us to do. The PUC then interprets that through a series of regulatory actions that establish sort of the basic parameters of how we define success, whether that be the avoided costs of avoided generation, whether that be thinking about our 3-year planning cycle and the demand resources plan that we talked about a little bit last time. And the Public Service Department acts as the state and the ratepayer interest advocate in that process. So we have sort of dual regulators in that model. So there's a significant number of pieces that come into play. The electric regulatory side is much more I would say closely controlled, and you've asked us to do quite a bit. And we're actually working on a graphic representation of the way the dollar flows and how they flow out to different programs, so that you can sort of see the way in which that flows. I think it's really useful. It was eye-opening for us, and we run this every day. And so there are several stipulations, many of which are sort of those geographic equity provisions and making sure we're cost effective and continuing to serve sort of the providing value in various ways to the state of Vermont and the people of Vermont, as well as a number of components about the way in which we are to interact with the distribution utilities and what their role is in various programs. And then on the thermal side, because the thermal, the revenue for the thermal pieces doesn't come from a direct charge on ratepayers. It comes, as we talked about last time, from the proceeds of 2 programs, the forward capacity market auctions and the regional greenhouse gas emission auctions or initiative auctions. That is not, there are fewer stipulations on that, but it is regulated through the PUC. We put forward a plan as to how we're going to spend those dollars. The Public Service Department and the PUC ask questions and recommend different, pulling different levers. And then there is an agreed upon and directed 3-year plan at the end of that process that maps out precisely how those dollars are to be spent. But as to go back to one of Kelly's first slides that I walked through in terms of that pie chart with the hole in the middle, that is really how in the terms of success of Efficiency Vermont, really thinking about where is the focus of current statute and the regulatory environment. It is obviously mentioned heavily focused on returning direct ratepayer value in certain forms on the electricity side. A similar set of performance metrics exists for our thermal budget as well. And then we have minimum performance requirements. So we have it at some point walk you through all of our qualitative performance indicators and minimum performance requirements. But it is quite a laundry list of things that we are navigating towards and making sure we're pulling levers in the right way and managing budgets appropriately and reporting so that everybody in the public is aware of what's happening, so that we can continue to do the good work that you've asked us to do. But it's quite extensive, the various ways in which the full budget is chopped up into much smaller and smaller pieces and then required to be sort of evenly spread, or not evenly spread, but a sort of minimum basis across the state. And then, as we mentioned before, that sort of focus on cost effectiveness is a really key driver of everything that we do. And I would argue that there are times when the measure, how we define what is effective, often could use a refresh, right? If we're talking about just dollars for megawatt hours, I would come back to you and say, like residential programs don't deliver that savings. Let's go out and meet with every large business in the state and drive down as much energy efficiency as we can. That's not appropriate either. And so we have to think about the balance of those pieces. I will say, you saw the maps in this report. I think we have some significant opportunity to work with our rural communities, to work with low-income customers, to work with moderate-income customers, to really help them along and access the programs that are available to everybody, but not as accessible for any number of reasons. That's a workforce challenge, as we talked about, in terms of the availability of contractors. That is a funding perspective. It's a financing piece, right? To make sure that people can fill the gap between how much an incentive covers of a project and what remains, so that they can still see the value of it over a course of time. We know that taking loans out for many Vermonters is in and of itself a fundamental barrier to moving forward with any number of things. We see, like classic lending, challenges across the board in terms of unscrupulous activity. We want to make sure that we are serving folks in the right way. So thinking about what we mean by effectiveness is the area where I like to have us rethink the conversation occasionally. Because as a whole, the primary metric we use is sort of that cost effectiveness across the board, dollar for dollar. But in the midst of it, you ask us to do a thousand different things. And I think it's important to have those balances, but it's also important to recognize that we need to reevaluate that conversation.
When was the last time the legislature reevaluated the statute that governs what you guys have to do?
There have been some changes at different points over the course of time. In 2020, there was an effort the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act was passed that took a look at how energy efficiency charge dollars were used and proposed some changes. That became a 3-year pilot, of which we're on the second period of now. It is a very modest and very constrained approach to modernization that had more of a focus on greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
But it really was about the sort of supporting elements of greenhouse gas emission reductions. Some of the programs we've run through those have been things like supporting automobile dealers in having the equipment and the charging capacity to be able to service and support electric vehicles. Because as Matt Coda, who represents the auto dealers, will tell you, most of the original equipment manufacturers, the car manufacturers, don't support dealers in that transition. And that's hard, right? That's tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially of equipment that some of the larger ones might need to purchase. And it squeezes out we've already seen a squeezing out of sort of local dealerships because they're not large enough to sort of get enough attention from the manufacturers. And the more that squeeze happens, because they're not supported. So we've been able to do some good work there and do some training with their staff so that they're knowledgeable about what the electric vehicles need, and so they can speak to customers who are interested. It's been a good program, but it's a relatively small piece. Dave, I don't know if you have any thoughts on when the last time sort of a more thorough evaluation of our statute has occurred.
Yeah, the last major suggested change to the statute affecting efficiency utility services probably would have been around 2014, when this is prior to the passage of the Renewable Energy Standard revisions of 2015. And there was a new section added, section 209 D3D, which is making available the use of electric funds for electrification thermal purposes. This was basically when heat pumps were just starting to come into the state through Efficiency Vermont's actions. And at the time, the thermal energy and process fuels budget, TEPF budget from FCM revenues and RGGI was very small and could not support the potential growth of heat pumps. And so we worked with legislators to include this. It's a very complicated review, however. It's a very onerous process to utilize electric funds for electrification purposes. And ultimately, with the passage of the Renewable Energy Standard Tier 3 statute, this essentially became a meaningless series of requirements. And so that was really the last major change. It never actually got put into use because it was very onerous to demonstrate to the commission. And ultimately, we withdrew our request to do so following the passage of Tier 3. And then lastly, I'll note that last year, the legislature made some changes to the Energy Savings Account program, making the Energy Savings Account program effectively fuel neutral and available to approximately $2 million worth of participating customers, and then a customer credit program, which would be significantly more hands-off than the Energy Savings Account program, but also fuel neutral to the tune of up to $1 million of customer participation.
So just so we could articulate what fuel neutral means, just because it sometimes doesn't land perfectly, I'll do it quickly.
Okay.
The ESA participants, for example, they're many of the largest business customers who pay a significant amount of money into the energy efficiency charge. They can spend those return funds on either thermal projects or electric projects with those dollars.
Okay.
So it is not limited to the electric charge related dollars. They do not have to spend it solely on electric purpose.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure we will see you again.